G'day, mate. This is the Do and Teach Guy podcast. Quick disclaimer, everything I say is my opinion or interpretation only, and is based on my logic, research, and convictions. All scriptures are read from the New King James Version. So veg out and let's give it a bash. This is episode 2. Today we're talking about the end times, and my current wacky theories surrounding it. I thought that I should get this topic out nice and early because I think that our time could be running out. This is part 1 of 4 because there's so much I want to cover. As you probably know, it's very hard to interpret future prophecies. So my views and opinions are always changing, but I thought I'd record a snapshot of where I was at the time of recording. Also, for time's sake, I'll be skipping over a bunch of references that led me to my conclusions. So I'm sorry, and/or you're welcome. Let's go. 70 Weeks Prophecy. Based on the 70 weeks of years from Jeremiah, and explained in Daniel chapters 9 to 12, 69 weeks of years were to pass before the Messiah came. And, sure enough, bang on time, Jesus shows up right where the Bible said he would. During Jesus' short ministry of a year and a bit, the stuff prophesied to happen in the first half of the first week of years was fulfilled. Then there was a gap, a large gap, an almost 2,000-year gap. But the last half of the last 7 years is coming soon, very soon. Sidetrack, how long was Jesus on the earth? Some people think that Jesus' ministry on earth was 3.5 years, but I see no biblical evidence to support that. If you keep track of God's 7 festivals throughout the Gospels, it's almost impossible to fit them over 3 years. 70 literal weeks is closer to reality, but you can research that more for yourself. In Daniel 9, verse 27, it says, "Then he shall confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifices and offerings, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate." The 1 week here could be referring to the 70th week of years. Then the covenant with the many could be the new covenant for all of Israel and those who are grafted into it, like the converted Gentiles. Jesus' death brought the sacrifices for sin to an end. Then the temple being destroyed years later stopped the offerings. Then the last bit, the poured out onto the desolate, could be referring to the Great Tribulation to come. Start of the last 3.5 years? I believe that the last 3.5 years will start around June 2027, which is 3.5 years before Jesus will return based on my current suspected timeline. There is an eclipse over Egypt on the 2nd of August in 2027, which could be a fulfillment of Amos chapter 8. You can look up the verse for yourself, but it basically says that it takes place in the summer, which August is summer for Israel. It says God will make the sun go down at noon, and this eclipse is slated to be visible from 8 AM to 12 PM, which is roughly in the middle of the day. Then it goes on to say that in the days coming, God will send a famine of His word. This, I believe, could be saying that God will pull back His involvement in curbing the demon's manipulation on the earth. This suggests that the 3.5 years will start, where things will get worse for predominantly those who follow God, believe in Jesus, and keep His commandments. Also, at or around this time, I think the Jews will start up their third temple sacrifices, if they haven't already. But their sacrifices will not be accepted by the Lord, just as they weren't after Jesus died. For there is no need for a new temple, because our bodies are the new temple. The temple may only need to be there so that the Antichrist can proclaim himself God. Anyway, June 2027 is 3.5 years before September 28th, 2030. This date is the Day of Trumpets for that year, and my best guess for when I expect Jesus to make his return. For reasons why this 2030 date is likely, refer to the Messiah 2030 YouTube channel. That goes through this at length. Great length. A little too much length. I do feel the urge to summarize their long video into one of my short episodes, but that may take a while to get around to. God's Festivals Calendar. Jesus will probably return on one of the days of trumpets, because that is the next event on God's prophetic calendar. If you didn't know, the first 4 of God's holidays related to the first coming of Jesus. Jesus died on Passover as the Passover lamb. He was in the grave during unleavened bread. He was raised on firstfruits as the first person to get his glorified body. Then at Pentecost, the Holy Spirit descended on the world as the new covenant started. The next 3 events on God's calendar are the Day of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and Tabernacles. These all celebrate the second coming of Jesus. The Day of Trumpets is historically when kings got crowned, and could represent Jesus' return at the start of the 1,000-year millennium. Every time the Bible talks about Jesus' return, there are always trumpets involved. So the Day of Trumpets is the most likely event for him to show up on. Next, the Day of Atonement could represent the Day of Judgment, where the wicked are separated from the righteous. And last, everybody's favourite, where the Bible commands us to celebrate for a whole week while camping out, the Festival of Tabernacles. This could be for celebrating God coming to Earth and living with his people forever on the new Earth 2.0. Sidetrack: Earth versions classifications. Earth 1.0 was the original creation. After sin entered, Earth 1.0 was modified to Earth 1.1. This introduced death, harder physical work for men, and harder emotional strains for women. I'll go into more detail about this in future episodes. Then the flood pushed an update to Earth 1.2. This update introduced meat into the diet, shorter lifespans, and the culling of corrupted DNA. More on that in another episode too. Earth 1.3 was a patch that allowed God to be on Earth with his people again, but in a limited version via the tabernacle. Earth 1.4 improved the ability for God's people to more easily follow his law with the New Covenant update. This put God's law in the people's hearts and was another attempt at God dwelling with his people, this time in a less physical form. Earth 1.5 will be coming out soon, as Earth 1.4 gets stripped down and new management is introduced. This is also the next version of God on Earth. Of course, I am referring to Jesus ruling for 1,000 years in the millennium. This and the next few versions will be covered later on in this series. Earth 1.6 is next, where the molten lava Earth is introduced. After that comes the big update, Earth 2.0, where everything is built again from scratch. Anyway, back to the festivals. I'm speeding through all these holidays because there's so much to cover. I recommend, if any part interests you, you should go and look them up for yourself. There's heaps of information and videos on God's festivals on the internet, so go nuts. I'd recommend anything from 119 Ministries if you want a place to start. I may even get around to doing an episode on all the festivals myself one day. Timeline rundown. So it's time to start going through my opinion on the future end times timeline. After June 2027-ish, the Antichrist makes his physical appearance. Even though the spirit of the Antichrist has been manipulating the world for the last 2,000 years. Also, the two witnesses do their stuff for a while. These two witnesses are most likely two actual people, but could represent two types of God's people. Regardless, persecution for those who obey the commandments and follow Jesus are the ones targeted. This will all ramp up and go on for about 3 years. Then we move on to the Great Tribulation. This will be, I believe, only 5 or 6 months long. More specifically, the last 6 months of the last 3.5 years of the last week of years that was prophesied in the 70 weeks prophecy. I don't believe the Great Tribulation will be 7 years like most people say. I think it needed to be cut down because by the sounds of it, no one could survive what's described for 7 years. After all, a much shorter, really bad part is definitely better than 7 years of torture. But when it comes down to it, even at 6 months long, it's not going to be pleasant. Not to say that the 3 years before that will be a cup of tea, but you know what I mean. I also believe that the rapture is not scheduled until the end of the Great Tribulation when Jesus returns. But don't be too depressed about that though, because I believe that God will protect his people to some extent during these times. A word of warning though, God will only protect his people. That excludes all the lukewarm and half-hearted pretenders. The start of the Great Tribulation. So that's enough of the groundwork, let's get into the good stuff. I would recommend that you give the book of Revelation a quick read through before you listen to this. I know you've read it before, but it's good to get a refresher. Right, now that you're back from reading Revelation, let's get into it. First of all, I think that all these trumpets and woes and stuff are all describing basically the same event. I don't believe that they fire off one after each other like most people say. I think they describe different aspects of what's happening at the same time. Revelation is not written like a schedule. It jumps around in time, not only from chapter to chapter, but also within the same chapter. The Asteroid Hits. On Friday the 13th in April 2029, the asteroid Apophis hits the planet. How funny is it that it lands on a Friday the 13th? Come on. Yes, I know scientists said that it would be a near miss, but that's based on calculations from the last time they saw it, plus, as if they'd tell us if it was really going to hit. It'd just cause unnecessary pandemonium with the people. It's not like they could tell a whole continent's worth of people to make plans to move. I'm sure that most of the major countries are working on asteroid planetary defenses right now, because this rock is headed our way and they probably know it's going to hit. The Bible calls this space rock, or burning mountain, wormwood. The first 5 seals in Revelation 6 take place in the years before Apophis hits, at the same time as the Antichrist and the 2 witnesses are doing their thing. These 5 seals contain the infamous 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, plus the dead metaphorically asking when God will avenge them. Sidetrack: do they really cry out from the grave? The people from the 5th seal are not actually asking when they will be avenged. I think it's just a representation of what they would feel or say. Since the dead don't have bodies, they don't have consciousness and can't talk. This is a topic that will be discussed in another episode. Anyway, back to the seals. The 6th and 7th seals cover the 5 or 6 months following the Apophis impact. The 4 Horsemen. I'll give my quick interpretation on my opinion of the 4 Horsemen in a minute, but first, I want to mention that I think Revelation 7 verses 1 to 3 slots into the timeline before the 4 Horsemen ride. After these things, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, "Do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads." The 4 angels holding back the winds, I believe, is referring to the Amos 8 passage, where there will be a famine of God's word on the earth. Basically, God will start holding back his spirit from the earth, like I mentioned before, which will allow the demons to start doing whatever they want with little interference. The other angels, I think, could be the 200 million, which we'll see later on. Then some more angels fly around the world and seal the true followers of God with a seal. I don't think that this seal will be physical or visible, but a spiritual one. This seal probably determines whether or not you'll have God's protection during the tribulation, as hinted at in Isaiah 26 verses 20 and 21, as well as other verses. "Come, my people, enter your chambers, and shut the doors behind you. Hide yourself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation is past. For behold, the Lord comes out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. The earth will also disclose her blood, and will no more cover her slain. This verse could just be referring to the Gog and Magog war and the bowls of wrath before the judgment, but that's getting way ahead of ourselves. The first seal and the first horseman. Now back to the 4 horsemen and the first seal as referenced in Revelation 6 verse 2. And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. This, I believe, is the rise of the Antichrist. His power will grow, and he will gain control over most of the world, probably in a pope-like religious manner as opposed to a king or general of an army. We might leave it here for now and pick up from the second seal and the next horseman next time. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. I pray that your faith grows, but more importantly, that it's shown through your life and your actions. Catch ya.